You good people are at a distinct disadvantage in coming to hear me. First of all, I have no papers, and therefore you never know when I'm going to finish. You could say, oh, he has only 3 more inches to go. One of the reasons I never use a paper is because I once heard a woman speaking of a sermon of a bishop. She said, glory be to God, after he had read his talk. If he can't remember it, how does he expect us to?
Travel along, Catholic pilgrims, for 1 year as we learn from Venerable Fulton Sheen, one of the greatest Catholic teachers in modern times. Join me, Amy Thomas, once a week for a short reading out of Bishop Sheen's book, Way to Inner Peace. Hello, Catholic pilgrims, and welcome to week 48. I know I've said this numerous times, but this week's reading might be my favorite. And I think the reason that it is because it pretty much encapsulates what I try to do through my Catholic pilgrim presence online. So the title of this week's reading is The Dark Side of Good. You may be raising your eyebrow and wondering what that's all about. But in essence, it's how the world has taken virtue, flipped it around, and now scorns at virtue. I see this all the time in comments on my writings, and I'm going to talk a lot about those today. But what I am trying to do, really what my message is trying to bring back virtue and morality and get people to see that living out virtue truly is the best way. And I know it because I, at one time in my life, did not live a virtuous life. And I was unhappy and miserable and depressed in many ways. And so I know what it's like to look at virtue with a scornful face, with scorn in my heart, really. And I know how unhappy that makes a person. And so now that I have learned my lesson, my message truly is to be Christ-like, to imitate Christ, like he said. And so I just really love this week's message. The 3 key points are encouragement, virtue, and light. Number 48, the dark side of good. Because of cold wars, high taxes, threats of inflation, and general insecurity, we have become accustomed to take a dark view of the world. There is some justification for this, for never before in the history of Christian civilization was there ever such a mass attack on decency, honor, personal rights, and freedom as there is at the present hour. While there is justification for looking on the dark side because of evil, there is, however, no justification for the present tendency to look upon the dark side of good. It is one thing to be gloomy about starvation, but it is quite another matter to be gloomy about good health. Disease has its shadows, but why see shadows in health? In a word, why is it that so many see the dark side of virtue, goodness, honesty, purity, and honor? In other ages, though men lost virtue, they still admired it. Though they ran from the battlefield at the first need of courage, they still admired the hero who fought and suffered. Though they threw away the map of the roadway of life, they never denied the need of a map. But in our generation, men look for shadow in the radiance of every virtue. Love of truth is called harshness and intolerance. Purity is called abnormality or fear of totems or myths. Humility is termed weakness. The meek are made to appear as lacking in force and strength. Those who pray and believe in God are labeled escapist. The generous are accused of seeking acclaim. The contemplative are sneered at as useless. The husband of one wife and a devoted father of a family is, quote, in a rut, unquote. A civilization can be forgiven for seeing the dark side of evil, but should it not examine its conscience when it begins to fear the dark side of the good? The right and normal reaction when one sees a shadow is to think of the light. In fact, the darker the shadow, the brighter the light. Goodness needs but little explanation, for good is self-propagating and self-explanatory. It is the evil, darkness, and suffering which need explanation. One does not only conclude to the existence of God because there are good things in the world, but one argues that because there is evil in the world, therefore there must be a God. For evil is a parasite on goodness. It has no capital of its own. Darkness is not a positive entity. Darkness is the absence of light and is intelligible only in terms of light. Most of the suffering of the world is intelligible in terms of the abuse of something that is so profoundly good that not even God will take it away for all eternity. And that is our freedom. Whence then comes the tendency to see the bad in things, if it be not that our consciences are already so burdened with guilt and hidden distortions that to ease them, we have to minimize the good in others and drag them down to the level of the worst, or else reduce heroism to mediocrity. Public officials are thought to be best described when not the good that they do is recounted, but when some suspicion or slur is cast upon their characters. The kettles are unhappy unless they call the pots black. How our outlook on the world would change if the makers of public opinion, instead of seeing the dark side of the evil alone, would see the bright side of the good. If they would single out politicians, businessmen, labor leaders, parents, and others who mirror forth great virtues and moral integrity, then the evil of the world would be more quickly overcome. When pestilence is abroad, it is encouraging to know that there are recoveries and there are many who are not stricken. But if our doctors are accused of being diseased and our teachers are accused of ignorance, if our public officials are all crooks, then who shall have hope? We do not make children give up writing because they spill the ink. The world is discouraged enough. It needs encouragement, inspiration, good example. Above all, it will be happier when it sees a standard and a Redeemer who invites us away from the dark side. I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me shall not walk in darkness. John 8:12. So good. I just love what he says here. I just love that he talks about these things. So many people are afraid to talk about these things. I love the fact that he never was. To call things what they are and to call things out. I absolutely love that about him, and I think that's why I have been drawn to Bishop Sheen's writings. The first thing I want to touch on is on page 170, at the very top. He's talking about how men look for shadow in the radiance of every virtue. And like I said at the beginning, I have tried through, my Catholic Pilgrim podcasts and writings to try to inspire people to virtue. Because like I said, I once lived a life very much lacking in virtue. Now, I would have called myself a good person. I think most people would have called me a good person. But I really wasn't a good person. I wasn't living out hardly any of the virtues. And so I know what the difference feels like. And so that's why I really am passionate about writing about the virtues. And over the years, as I've written, I have noticed exactly what he's talking about. If I write about some particular virtue, whether that be chastity or temperance or living a monogamous marriage or having children and raising a family, anything that is truly good, anytime I write about it, it is inevitable that I will get comments from people who scorn the virtue. And they do exactly what Bishop Sheen says here. If I talk about how we need to speak the truth because it's not loving to lie to people, let's take the transgender issue, for example. I've written many, many times about the lies of the transgender movement and how it's hurting people significantly because we are lying to them by not telling them the truth of who they are. Now, if these people have a mental illness and we're going along with it, that's terrible. Or if they're doing it just because it's a fad and we're still playing along, that's terrible. It's not loving to lie to people to their face. And, I write about it all the time. And I will always get somebody who comes on and tells me that the most loving thing to do is just to go along with it. And we need to tolerate everything and that Jesus would tolerate everything. But that's not true. Love does not equal tolerance of sin. It just doesn't. And oftentimes I'll be called, like he says, harsh and intolerant. And when it comes to sin, yes, we should all be intolerant of sin. That doesn't mean we don't love the person, and I always have to reiterate that over and over and over again. I just had a lady a couple weeks back who said, yeah, it's nice to want to speak the truth to the younger crowd, but you just really have to be careful that you don't come off sounding like a gong, because if you sound like a gong, then they're never going to listen to you at all. And I said to her, do you realize that anytime you speak truth to somebody who is sinning and they want to continue in that sin, they are going to think you are a gong, no matter how you deliver the message. You could deliver it like Jesus, and they still won't hear you. Because that's what happened to Christ. The Pharisees did not listen to Christ, and he delivered his message of love in the most perfect way, and his message of truth in the most perfect way, and yet people still did not listen. And so, I think it's a cop-out. Yes, obviously, we don't want to sound like the Westboro Baptist people who yell on the street corners telling people that they're all going to hell and that they're all sinful and worth nothing and God hates them. Obviously, that's not the way to go about it. But I cannot stand it when people say that if you speak truth to people and it's not what they want to hear, then that automatically means you're just being harsh or that you're a gong. Bishop Sheen goes on to say, purity is called abnormality or fear of totems or myths. I mean, how many times are Christians or Catholics made fun of because we call people to purity? All the time. I mean, people will look at you with a sideways glance if you think that you should wait until marriage or that you shouldn't live with somebody before you get married. People think that that's crazy. My husband, he recently had a conversation with a family member of his who's in his early 20s, and he's getting ready to move in with his girlfriend. And my husband told him, he said, I wouldn't recommend doing that. And his family member was just like, what? He's like, yeah, I just don't think that that's the right thing to do. And I would know because I lived with Amy before we were married, and we both recognized that that wasn't a good thing to do. And Dustin went on to explain, why you should wait and why it isn't a good thing to live together before marriage and all of those things. And it was like Dustin was speaking a foreign language because the world has said that purity or chastity is something to be scorned. I mean, you're nothing but a prude. And they just look down on it when actually you are saying yes to your future spouse, saving yourself for them and not bringing a bunch of baggage into your marriage. Continuing on, Bishop Sheen says, humility is termed weakness. The meek are made to appear as lacking in force and strength. Those who pray and believe in God are labeled escapists. I've heard this one so many times. The atheists show up on my page and they'll talk about how, praying to my sky god is nothing but me not being able to live in the world and handle the truth that you're just going to die one day and that's it. And you turn into stardust. And so you use all this prayer nonsense to escape that reality. We hear that all the time. When actually being faithful and searching for God and being religious and pious in the right way is a very good thing, because it's recognition that you aren't the only person in the world. You aren't the best thing since sliced bread. That you owe gratitude to a higher being. That you owe worship, not to yourself, but to a higher being. And I think that's a virtue that is extremely lacking today, because what we see instead is the worship of the self. He continues on, the contemplative are sneered at as useless. The husband of one wife and a devoted father of a family is in a rut. Oh yes, I hear this all the time. Monogamy is boring. Why would you ever want to be with one person for the rest of your life? Staying with somebody till the end of time just sounds miserable. Monogamy and marriage is seen as being in a rut. And the real person gets out there and sleeps with as many people as they can, and that life is adventurous and exciting and thrilling. But oh my, to sleep with one person for the rest of your life just sounds like pure torture. But that's to deny honor, loyalty, dedication, sacrifice, all of those things, true love. And we see that wounds people. You just have a trail of wounded people who have just been used, and they go out and use people, and nobody really feels loved, nobody really feels complete, nobody really feels whole. But they've gotten this message that to be chaste in a marriage, to be devoted to one spouse, is somehow just the worst thing you could ever do. I recently had read an article about how a lot of guys, I think I talked about this, about how a lot of guys were getting vasectomies after Roe versus Wade was overturned. A high number of young men who were not fathers, who weren't even married, were rushing off to get vasectomies. And that's just a horrible thing. It's just a horrible thing to go and cut off your fertility because now women can't get abortions in some places. It just shows a lack of devotion to anybody, just thinking of yourself. And it really shows how these men use women. Because, oh man, if there's the potential that you could get pregnant and you can't go kill your child, well, I better go and mutilate my body in order to make sure that I don't have any kids. But I'd still like to use you, though. I mean, I had tons of people show up talking about how it was more virtuous to get a vasectomy than to wait for marriage to have children. I mean, I had women who are like, I would only seek out a man who's had a vasectomy because I don't want children. And that tells me he's serious about not having children either. And so, basically what you're playing around with is just a teenage boy forever. Because in order for a man, for a guy to really become a man, he has to take on fatherhood in some capacity, whether that be biological. And for most men, that's what it is. Some men, it's to adopt children. Some men, it's to take on the religious life. Some men, it's to be a mentor to other boys and to girls too, to be a father figure. But unless and until a guy does that, he will not truly ever be a man, like a good, strong man. And if you're trying to shirk the responsibility of fatherhood completely for your own selfish desires, that is not virtuous. And these people were coming on and telling me that it was. And that men who want to wait until marriage are not virtuous. I mean, it's just an upside down world and it's crazy. But I think Bishop Sheen hits on the reasons why. Why is virtue scorned upon? It's on the next page, on page 171. He says, "Whence then comes the tendency to see the bad in things? If it be not that our consciences are already so burdened with guilt and hidden distortions that to ease them, we have to minimize the good in others and drag them down to the level of the worst, or else reduce heroism to mediocrity." That's the key right there. That is why virtue is scorned. Because in our culture, the message has been one of mediocrity, and people have just aimed for that low bar, and they're not really happy with themselves. And they've sunk themselves into vices and into sins. And because God has given us a conscience, we know when we sin. We know when we are addicted to some vice. But we like them. That's why we keep doing them. But we know. And so because the world has told us to just aim for this low bar of mediocrity, that's all people shoot for. But then there's the guilt. There's the guilt of not really doing something with your life. God has given you this life, this gift, and you aren't doing anything with it other than just pleasing yourself. And that doesn't fulfill anybody. But now that we've removed God, people don't know where to turn. And so when they see someone shining like a light, shining with virtue, they don't like it. Because that light shines on their darkness, and then they have to see themselves for who they truly are. And people do not like to do that. We've talked about that before in other readings. That mirror, people do not like to have a mirror put in front of their face, and virtuous people will put a mirror in front of your face. And so the goal is to bring them down to your level, knock them down to mediocrity, get them to stop shining so much. And then I won't feel so bad. And that's what this is all about. That is why we are tearing down statues of founding fathers and courageous and heroic people. Yes, they've had sins in their past, but everybody has, except two people on this earth, and that's Mary and Christ. So if you're looking around for good, virtuous people that have zero sins in their life, you're never going to find them. So instead, we still have to look at the whole person, who they were. What were they striving for? What sins did they struggle with? Not everybody is perfect at all the virtues. Usually there are virtues that you're pretty good at doing and pretty good at practicing. And then there are virtues that you really struggle with. And we have to look at those people. But now the goal is just to paint everybody bad. Everybody's bad except for me. I'm good. And we just tear it all down. We don't give people context. We don't give people the benefit of the doubt. Nothing. I just want to bring them down to my level because they shined too bright, or they shine too bright. And I can't handle that because I'm not doing anything. And I know what I've actually become, and it makes me depressed. And so instead of working their way out of that rut, the easier thing is just to try to, knock down the people who are shining so brightly. And so what we have to do as Christians, as Catholics, is stand up to this. We have to teach our children about the saints and show their lives for what they truly were. They struggled with sins, but they fought them with Christ's help and with his grace. And they overcame things that seemed impossible. And they went on to have amazing, heroic, adventurous lives that we can look at and say, man, I want to be like them. I want to imitate their virtues. That's somebody I can look up to. That's somebody who can give me hope, especially the saints who were sunk in sin. Think of them. They can give us hope because we can see that there is a way out of it. And so, as parents, as grandparents, we have to start teaching our kids about the saints, about, the people in the Bible, and showing how they struggled with different things. And just our heroes here in America, those that were courageous. Yes, they had flaws. We all have flaws. We can still show where they were shining. We can still take the good from them and look up to that. And we can see the contrast between, the things that they were doing wrong, but the things that they were getting right. And that should give us all hope. And honestly, we just have to stand up and have the courage to speak about virtue, to not be ashamed of it, to not hide it, under a lampshade, not to be afraid to prop up the virtues and talk about them. We should never be afraid of that. We should always be championing that. And I think the last paragraph is the most important of the whole reading. He says, "We do not make children give up writing because they spill the ink. The world is discouraged enough. It needs encouragement, inspiration, good example. Above all, it will be happier when it sees a standard and a Redeemer who invites us away from the dark side. I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me shall not walk in darkness." So let's be those types of people, Catholic pilgrims. We will encourage the world. We need to give encouragement to the world. I know sometimes it seems like things are just going to hell in a handbasket and that there's more evil than good, but that's not true. Goodness, like he says, doesn't need any self-explanation. It often doesn't get highlighted because it's just doing its thing. But we need to bring it forth more. We need to show it more. We need to make sure we're living out the virtues so that we can shine a light on darkness. And that is for sure how we start to turn things around. So that is all for this week, Catholic pilgrims. I will see you back here for week 49. And until then, live the faith boldly and travel well.